Hey, what's up? You didn't expect to see me this soon, huh? By the way, do you like the music in the background? No? Okay, let's change it up. Much better. Coincidentally, I'll be talking about music and video games, specifically their impact. You might be asking me right now, Dorian, why talk about music? And yeah, it's a pretty weird topic for a 16-year-old who doesn't even know much about music. Like, seriously, I don't know half the terms used, like, what the fuck are these? But this is more of a laid-back video appreciating the contributions music gives to the gaming industry, whilst roasting games that fuck this up. Because in my years, music can impact the atmosphere, story, gameplay, and even the player in more ways that you may not even expect. It can make scenes and their gameplay with it have so much more power and emotion, and how the lack of music can make games feel wondrous, and how in one way music can feel powerful and emotional, music can also make games feel terrifying and scary. And when music is memorable, it can lead to the player tying it to certain experiences, which can lead us to long or want for moments in the past. And because bad music can never be left behind, you can also see its impact in the opposite end, how it can make games feel bland and boring, and how it can make the game lose its atmosphere, and how it can bring out the wrong emotion than what the director envisioned in his scene. And I think I just want to talk about it today. I'll start off by giving a small, bite-sized history about music and video games. The first video game is still disputed to this day. People say it's the cathode ray tube amusement device, which came out in 1947, but it never passed as a prototype, so some people think it's Birdie the Brain, which came out in 1950, which is basically tic-tac-toe. And a year later, Nimrod came out, which is basically the ancient game Nim against an AI. But both were disputed because others think its usage of light bulbs and not actual graphics should disqualify it. And in 1952, OXO came out, and it had actual graphics, but it being the first is also disputed because of it lacking real-time graphics. So in 1958, about 6 years later, Tennis for Two came out, and I filled out all the arguments for it to be the first video game, but even its place is disputed because it came out so late, and its only innovation is it being fun, because it was the first ever game made to entertain. People still dispute the first ever video game, and with that trouble being settled, you might think that the first ever game with sound would also be disputed. And luckily, it's not. The first ever video game to have sound is Computer Space. Judging by the footage and the noise in the background, it was very primitive, and in general, people found the game to be exciting and innovative, but there were others that thought it was just a passing fad. Oh, how wrong they'll be. For the next 6 years, arcade machines continued to carry music in their games. This was the beginning of the video game industry. Games like Pong and Breakout had basic beeps and boops, and although it's okay, it's a start at least. And in 1977, the Atari 2600 came out. Sound-wise, they didn't make much of an innovation. It still sounded like beeps and boops, but they sounded like slightly deeper beeps and boops. Well, I brought up the Atari 2600 because it's one of the first few consoles in the industry, and it was a turning point in music/sound in games, because arcades started to incorporate music in the background, and even cutscenes. Donkey Kong is a prime example of that. And then the pieces just started rolling into place, because the NES came out as a family computer, or the Famicom in Japan. This is when music started to sound like actual music. It has a bit-like feel. Its aesthetics are still popular to this day. And then after the 8-bit era, the 16-bit consoles came out, and I honestly have nothing much to add. It's basically what I said about the 8-bit era, but it sounds better. And in 1991, the Sega CD came out, which is one of the first few consoles that run CD-ROMs, which basically allows games to have CD quality audio, which is significantly better than the cartridge-based systems previously. Here, have a listen. and I already have a video talking about how the Sega CD's music capabilities impact a game, specifically Sonic CD. You can watch it here. Like from what I said earlier, all the pieces just started falling into place. After CDs came out, allowing for CD quality audio, nobody really looked back from that. And to this day, games use CD quality music or the aesthetics of the 8-bit and 16-bit sound chips. So after such a long, semi-detailed, semi-bite-sized deep dive into the history of video games and its music, you may be asking what makes for a good usage of music, because I never really explained what in my opinion constitutes as a good usage of music. Well, in my eyes, or ears in this case, it has to clear 2 out of the 4 criteria that I have. First, it has to sound good. That part is pretty obvious. Second is that it should have an impact on the story. What I mean by this is that it should be able to heighten or make scenes more dramatic. Obviously, this doesn't need to apply to games that barely have any focus on the story. Third is that it should have an impact on the atmosphere or in gameplay in general. What I mean by this is that the music here should impact the feel of the game and make it feel a bit more intense and powerful. Now that we've done that, I want to tackle good and bad examples of it. First, let's start with the impact on the atmosphere. While I know plenty of games that makes this as an advantage, the one I want to talk about today is The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. I want to talk about this because its usage of music I find very interesting, mainly because of its lack of music. And yeah, I can hear it already that Breath of the Wild wasn't the game that invented this, which, you're right. I just find how it used music very fascinating. Plus, other games that you might be thinking might appear later. Okay, back to the topic. So Breath of the Wild uses music in an interesting way. And said interesting way is how it doesn't use it a lot. And this decision was made so the player can feel the wonder of exploring the land of Hyrule. And it just pulls you into the world. And how in awe you can be at the size of it. You can feel the wonder and beauty of this game's soundtrack, not only when you're in a tough fight against Windblight Ganon, but also when you're chilling in Link's house in Hateno. And even the somber music when you're just walking around the world. Do you see what I mean? It uses music that sucks you into the land of Hyrule, makes you feel that you yourself are in it. Because for most of the game, it's just Link and the sound effects, but when the music kicks in, you know that there's something to take note of. A bad example of music adding to the atmosphere is sadly Sonic R. While this game is my little guilty pleasure, and I have to admit the music here is great, I just find it a weird fit. Some of them thematically make sense, but it goes as deep as a kiddie pool. That's how deep it goes. For example is Can You Feel the Sunshine? In Resort Island, other than saying that there is a sun there, what does it add to the world? To be fair to Sonic R, it is a racing game, compared to Breath of the Wild, which is an open-world action-adventure game. So to compare it to something slightly more comparable, here is Virtual High Glide. And yes, before you ask me, this is a game that actually exists. All that I have to show you is when the main character fights a dragon.
It's time to stop!
Like, what do you want me to say? First of all, what the fuck are these graphics? This looks like pixel art I made when I was 6. Okay, so if you don't understand, ask yourself this question. What is the music's goal here? Obviously, it's to make the game feel more intense because there's a boss fight. So ask yourself another question. Did it achieve its goal?
Serious?
If you said no, then you understand the problem, especially when you compare it to the Windblight fight in Breath of the Wild. This is because in Breath of the Wild you feel the intensity, not just with the fight, because it's enhanced by the music. When you compare it to High Glide, it's night and day. You almost feel nothing. The music is dull, and it doesn't enhance the boss fight at all. If anything, it actually brings it down. Well, now you see the impact of music in the atmosphere of a game, and how it can enhance your game experience. Actually, before I end this segment, I want to discuss its impact on more scary games. Here on the screen is the gameplay of Condemned: Criminal Origins. Notice how it doesn't use music, or when it does, it uses very regular sounding items from the real world. This is so fucking nice, mainly because it gives a very liminal feel, and it makes it feel scarier, mainly because it shows you something familiar, while feeling unfamiliar. Do you get what I'm trying to say? It's okay. If you don't understand, think of it this way. Liminal spaces show you the image of something familiar, but it's devoid of life. A place normally filled with people is just empty, and it's pretty unsettling. An example of this is to think of a place commonly filled with people like a mall, and compare a mall filled with people to this. You see it now, right? Something just feels off. It's a feeling of discomfort in a place that's supposed to be familiar, but it's not quite there yet. Okay, with that small tangent over, look back at Condemned. Listen to the game and how it implements liminal spaces audio wise. It doesn't have much music, but it uses sound effects really well to make it feel like you yourself are in the world. With that out of the way, we can now talk about music's impact on the story of games. Basically, music impacts a story in multiple ways. Obviously, it can make scenes more emotional, or in general, make the player feel something. To make an easy, very understandable example, I have to deviate from the normal medium. Film is an art form similar to games, but I specifically brought up films because on how they use music. And a great example of that is Shrek 2 and how it used Holding Out for a Hero. I also just want to talk about it. Obviously, you already should know that this is the peak of storytelling. We know that this is where he might lose Fiona, and all the stakes are on the scene, and it's just so good. The music here also symbolizes the hero Fiona is waiting for, whilst the fairy godmother is talking about Prince Charming here, because she's trying to make Fiona kiss him for the love potion to start its effects. And it's just so good. I feel like I'm on the edge of my seat watching this, and the music adds a great deal of power and emotion to the excellent scene. Okay, back to video games. Now you know how music can impact scenes in movies, it can impact games in a very similar way. One of my favorite examples of the impact of music is Mega Man 3. The basic TLDR of the story is that after beating Dr. Wily twice, Mega Man quitted because he's getting tired of fighting Wily and he wants to go back to being a normal servant. That's my interpretation of the story at least. It's pretty hard to see what they were generally up to because it's hard to tell. The story is mostly up to the player's interpretation. And when you boot up Mega Man 3, you hear a somber and epic piece, as if Mega Man doesn't want to fight anymore, but he knows that he has to save the world from Wily's clutches. It's a fairly tragic tale about a hero needing to prioritize the world over himself. And in the middle of the game, you hear this flute. And when it's revealed the one playing it is Mega Man's brother, it was called back to at the end of the game. Just listen for yourself. Considering that this game came out back in 1990, it's surprising how much they got out of the music. And with all the praising that I've done, I want to do some more. Something more modern. So, we'll be talking about Sonic Adventure 2. Kill me. So basically, the climax of Sonic Adventure 2 is very climactic, and the music in the background encapsulates Shadow's arc in the game, which is basically about how Shadow learned that what Maria, who basically was Shadow's sister, wants isn't destruction of mankind, but in fact a better future for them. Shadow just didn't realize it because he blamed humans for her death, because it was humans that unjustifiably pulled the trigger. Obviously, his line of logic was wrong, and Amy shaked his memory so he was able to realize that he was wrong. And in the climax, we hear the lyrics live and learn. The dramatic cohesion of the song and the game story is really cool. Through the pain he endured, he lived and learned from his mistakes, which he had to pay for with his life. Until it wasn't. With two good examples of how music can impact the game's story, there are also times where it's done terribly. One of the examples here is Sonic 06. Brushing off how completely dogshit this story is, let's just cut to the part where Sonic dies. And yes, he dies.
Sonic! Sonic! Sonic?
Compare the scene where Sonic dies to the unironically masterful, funny haha scene in Breaking Bad. Pay attention to how they use music.
Do what you're gonna do.
Aside from Breaking Bad having way better cinematography, tension, and in general writing, in Sonic 06 they overcompensated with the music, removing the very little tension this game had, compared to Breaking Bad, which handled this so well by having no music, leaving Walt on the floor after trying his best to bargain for Hank's life. And when he failed, we see how it hits Walt like a freight train. The obvious difference between Breaking Bad and Sonic 06 is that Sonic 06 made the scene look like a joke by its overcompensation of music, compared to Breaking Bad, which barely used it, making the scene a lot more powerful. And that's how music impacted both the atmosphere and the story. But now I want to talk about its impact on you, the player. It may be a bit strange to believe that music has an impact on the player, and I believe it does in multiple ways, and I've discussed most of it today, how the music can affect the gameplay and story, and I was able to discuss this through my emotions, because it was able to affect me in both a good and bad way. But what I want to discuss in this segment is when the music was able to be so memorable that it becomes a ticking time bomb in your brain. And once you hear the music again, a rush of longing and wistful affection of the past hits the player. And the topic is called nostalgia. Nostalgia is a picky topic for me, mainly because it's based on your experiences. For others, Teletubbies is just some kiddie show, but to actual people, it's a show of their lost childhood. I personally just want to discuss two games that had this impact on me. Both of them I love wholeheartedly to this day. And those two games are Pokemon Emerald and Minecraft. First up is Pokemon Emerald. It's one of the first few games to introduce me to gaming. I still remember those days when I booted up my Game Boy Advance and when I hid it from my parents so they wouldn't take it away from me. I still have my GBA, but now I play Pokemon Emerald on my DS Lite, or an emulation. The moment in this game that really hits me hard is the music, specifically in Little Root. It represented a time capsule for me, a time when I didn't know what to do and just continuously walked around trying to find an exit, and the time when I was falling in love with games. And in Minecraft, the impact is similar. I still remember going to my friend's house, and we got 1 hour to play the game, so we desperately kept rotating the two controllers to all three of us. And when I got older, I started playing Minecraft with my new friends on Bedrock and on Java. The memories we made were memories that will stick with me for a while. Here are screenshots of the world they mostly built, and here are the animations commemorating these events, made by my friend, James. And although it's been years since we played the game, every time I do boot up Minecraft, the thing that remains consistent through all the game's updates is its music. Every time I hear the overworld theme, I get reminded of the thousands of hours I burned onto this game, both the good and the bad experiences I had with all the homies I met along the way. Overall, nostalgia and music in general to me is like looking into a sunset. It can be a fleeting moment in your mind, but it's beautiful. It's a mark on the atmosphere you won't forget even if you don't notice. Because even if you don't notice it, your brain does. Thanks to James for making that beautiful 10-second animation of me looking into the sunset, and thank you all for watching.